As we've mentioned before, some of you may remember, and the reason I'm here chatting with you instead of Chris is Chris has retired as of last week, and we have some big shoes to fill. And Doug will be retiring this week, and so we wanted to celebrate them and get them back, both back for our online friends as well as our in-person friends. So next week they'll be joining us for the Hort Hour, where you can ask us anything and we will make up answers for you. So in the chat, there is a link. We're going to have the Hort Hour, and then we're going to have an on-site celebration. So those of you who are local, if you want to go to that link in the chat that Arlene's put in, the Sign Up Genius, and you can RSVP there. We know a lot of people are going to want to be there, and we have limited space. So we will we'll start the program at 3 as normal, and then we'll allow Chris and Doug to step away at 3:30 for the celebration. So if you think you can make it, Sign Up Genius. That'll be next Wednesday, June 29th. All right, it looks like it's 12 noon, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. A couple of upcoming programs that we have. Next Monday, the 27th, we have Gardening Adventures with Extension Master Gardener Volunteers, our joint program with Wake County Extension Master Gardeners. And they're going to be talking about seasonal plants in container gardens, thrills, spills, and fills with Tracy Thomason. So I think that's going to be a great one. They also have a fantastic new resource for gardening in this area. My guess is they might have some of those to sell, or at least will provide an online link to where you can do that. We have some youth programs, I Spy tours. We have one on the 28th at 11 o'clock a.m. Look at that. And I mentioned on the 29th, we'll have our horticulture hour, or as we call it in-house, Stump the Chumps. A program that you'll need to register for on the 30th, Thursday, is the photography walk with Mary Louise Reeves at 10 o'clock a.m. And it's about controlling light to enable photography in the garden all day. That's something I need, because I'm get washed out photos in the middle of the day and dim photos in the evening. Just a couple more programs. One that's on site in person, but we always love it, is the Plant Lovers Tour on Tuesday, July 5th. And then we'll go have our midweek program, Gardening 101, and that's going to be me talking about gardening in dry shade.
I don't really know how tall this.
And big one on Tuesday, July 12th, is our evening garden stroll starting at 4:30. So we will keep the gardens open later to enjoy slightly cooler weather and get to see the garden in the evening, when it's really a beautiful day. We'll hit a couple more midweek program for July 13th is going to be me talking about recent travel to Costa Rica, and maybe a little bit about another trip to Costa Rica, another opportunity perhaps. And then for those who are perhaps in the business or more interested in in-depth information, we have our Landscape and Professional Field Day. That's a joint program with the horticulture department here at NC State and the Arboretum. And we have talks about pest control and new plants on the market and how to price landscape jobs, those kinds of things. It's really to help the professionals there. And that's Thursday, July 14th. And that is a pay program, a pre-register program. So do make sure you pre-register for that. Today, we have our last full program with Doug Ruhren until we twist his arm to get him back here to teach other courses, because he still has so much to teach all of us. So we're going to be doing the Plant Lovers Tour of the Xeric Garden. That's a pre-recorded program, but Doug will be stopping and we'll talking live and answering questions. I do not promise that I can answer questions as fast as Chris could, because my typing is not quite that fast, but I'll do the best I can. So if everybody can turn off cameras and mute themselves, we'll go ahead and get going. We going?
One question. I just want to thank the two of you for the 5 years I've been going.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I've made me a better person in the garden.
Well, I've always enjoyed having you in the audience, because you always have the most wonderful smile on your face.
No, thank you.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate everybody who comes out for these tours. The topic today is the general topic is Xeric plants, Xeric, not a term that's commonly used in English language, I guess, unless you live in California or the southwest of this country. But ecologists describe areas as either hydric, mesic, or xeric. And so hydric obviously is referring to water, they're wet sites. Xeric referring to dry sites, and mesic, sort of in between. And somebody's going to ask me, how many inches of rain does that come out to? I do not know. I don't feel like I really need to know. We are in the humid east. We live in a largely mesic environment with periods of flooding and periods of drought. So we will see a lot of plants that are very drought tolerant today, and we'll talk about a lot of strategies that plants have for dealing with drought, or periodic drought, but the focus will be primarily on the plants. And thank you, interns, for showing up. I was starting to think you weren't going to. We have 5 interns today, and remember, next month they will be leading the tour, talking about roughly about 3 of their plants I think are of note in the Arboretum. It's always a really fun time. So I hope you and others will come out for that tour. We are going to head this way, go up to the roof. When we go to the Xeric Garden, we're going down a long flight of steps. If anybody has a problem with that, we could take a different route back down. We'll get started. We haven't yet quite gotten to the roof, as yes, you very well know. Look at that lovely live oak seedling that come up everywhere. And they're a nuisance to dig out. They have such a taproot. But I do want to start at this very notable Xeric plant. This is one of the Hesper aloes. Hesper referring to the evening. I guess maybe the flowers sort of open up more in the evening than they are right now. Well, I don't know if that's the case, because the hummingbirds will visit these all day longs. But I think it's next week. The talk is on the Asparagaceae, which is related to this, in that decades ago, the lily family encompassed a huge number of plants. And there were, including yuccas, agaves, Hesper aloes, dazzlerians, and other similar plants. And they are commonly referred to as woody lilies because they were in the lily family back then. And many of them have woody stems, but Hesper aloe is one of them. This is not the common Hesperella parviflorum. This is Hesperella campanulata. Campanelle referring to a bell, a little bell. The flowers are sort of bell-shaped, and they bloom for months and months and months in the summer, regardless how dry it gets. And as I mentioned, the hummingbirds do like them. they're very small scale plants, relatively speaking, compared to other woody lilies, and permanent in the garden. We'll see plants of Hesperella parviflora elsewhere today. Any questions on that? I think anybody who wants to support hummingbirds should have a Hesperella in their garden if they have enough sun.
Do questions in between?
Yeah, that is how we've rebroadcast these tours. We'd show a small segment and then leave an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. I think we accepted questions either out loud or typed in the whatchamacallit, the chat, I guess. So
yeah, you're welcome to unmute yourself. Somebody asked, what is the common name for Hesperella?
Hesperella parviflora is often called the red yucca. Not a very lovely common name. And Hesperallo is referring to the evening and its resemblance to an aloe. So I prefer that name over false red yucca. It doesn't have an identity crisis problem. I saw a lovely selection of the common Hesperella parviflora in one of the big box retailers. It's one with the cultivar name of Perpa, P-E-R-P-A, but its trademark name is Stoplight. It's really a brilliant scarlet color.
We won't linger over the geophyte border, the bulb border, but of course, one strategy with dealing with dry weather is going dormant during the dry time of the year. So that's a strategy that many bulbs have. That's why many plants are bulbous, because they go dormant during the dry part of the year and then return when the rains return. Surviving the dry spell in the bulb underground. And I use bulb in a broad sense because the Sinningias, this is Sinningia saloviana, one of the wild parents of the hybrids we'll see today, makes a big tuber underground, really quite large. I've never dug up a long established plant, but just in a pot, it'll make, a good sized tuber underground. And they're very drought tolerant, but the Sinningia is not an example of a bulbous plant that goes dormant, but a lot of bulbs are native to the Mediterranean climates where there's a dry season and a wet season. So plants native around the Mediterranean Ocean or South Africa or other areas of the world characterized by a Mediterranean climate. And the Mediterranean climate is characterized by a wet season and a dry season. And in many of those areas, it's the winter growing at winter time when plants grow, because then there's moisture available and the weather's a little bit milder. I'm hoping that at the end of the bulb border, the other wild parent of the hybrid Sinningia is in bloom. This is a hybrid with the cultivar name of Lovely. Its growth habit is more typical of the other wild parent, Sinningia tubiflora, where it has basal foliage and then scapes arising from the ground rather than, the tall upright stem like Saloviana. But a similar Sinningia, who is this? I think this is Arkansas Bells. You see, the growth habit is much more like the Saloviana hybrid at the end of the border. And there's a red one back there. Scarlet Bells, I think. But nice yellow one here. Bananas Foster. And these Sinningias will bloom all summer long and into the fall up until cold weather. So they really, really earn their keep. This is full sun all day. And, like most of the Arboretum, we don't irrigate except in extremely dry spells. Like we're starting to do some watering in the garden just so we don't lose quality. But except for the lath house, there's no part of the Arboretum that's watered on a regular basis. Dahlias are the wild parents of dahlias are native to Mexico, and they're fairly drought tolerant, but they perform better if they're not drought stressed. They will survive drought, but if you want them to do well, I wouldn't recommend them for a Xeric garden. And the bulb border is not really a Xeric planting from the standpoint that we try to keep stuff, blooming all year round in the bulb border. Okay. Now, as we come, we consider this the roof garden, even though we're not, we have another 50 feet before we actually get up on the roof. And this little rock garden is not really a Xeric planting, but there are some Xeric plants of note in it. And it's a little bit shabby now because some of the things that were so pretty earlier are going to seed. The little Iberis simplex is a little annual, maybe you could consider it a biennial. The plants that have blooms for months are now setting seed. These will turn brown and be shed, and then there'll be a carpet of seedlings, which we always have to thin out, but we always leave some because they earn their keep in the spring when they carpet themselves with these flowers that I guess open white and then turn sort of lavender. But this is its foliage. It's a tiny little thing, but really earns its keep. And another annual that reseeds every year is this Jazzione, which is just starting to bloom, will bloom a good part of the summer. I'm worried about that campanula because I think that might be actually that real aggressive spreading adenophyre. We raised it as something else, but sometimes when you get seeds from other organizations, they're not always what they're supposed to be.
Okay. I did say earn its keep an awful lot of times. But it's just the idea that, garden space is limited and our time is limited. So we want something that earns its keep, that's worth laboring over, worth giving space to in the garden. Are there any questions about what we just viewed?
Yeah, Doug, I was wondering about that Iberis simplex. Is that what we know as candy tuft?
It's not the common candy tuft, but yes, the common candy tuft is another species of Iberis sempervirens, meaning evergreen. And the common candy tuft is a perennial, whereas this little guy is, flowers, set seeds, and dies, a true annual.
Okay. But is that candy tuft is fairly drought tolerant too, isn't it?
It is. It's generally blooming late winter, early spring before it turns real dry, and doesn't matter too much if it's real dry in the summer.
Okay, thank you.
The umbel family, the family that, common members of the umbel family, the umbelliferae, well, actually, it's now the Apiaceae, are parsley and dill and fennel and parsnips and celery. But this is one that's grown as an ornamental. It's the moon carrot, Cecily gumifera. I can pull the label out if you want to see it. Did you see that all right? Cecily gumiferum. It's a biennial or monocarpic at least. First year or so, it makes this basal rosette of really pretty, finely dissected blue foliage. And then the year it decides to bloom, this is what it does. And being an umbel, member of that family, I suspect later on when this is in sun, there'll be lots of pollinators visiting the flowers. Now the specific epithet, the second part of a species name, gummiferum, means bearing gum. FER always refers to bearing, like bearing gifts. And I wasn't able to find any information on the culinary or medicinal use of this plant. And I do have to say, even though there are a lot of edible members of this family, there's also some deadly poisonous members of this family, such as deadly poison hemlock and water hemlock. Despite the hemlock name, they're not at all related to our conifers hemlocks. So I'm not going to taste this without knowing whether or not it's edible, because I consider all members of this family poisonous until I know better. But if you do any Indian cooking, you might know a spice, or I guess it would be considered a spice, asafoetida. It's from another member of this family, and it's collected as a gum. And the way it's collected is the big what is I'm forgetting the genus of asafoetida, but when it starts to put up the inflorescence and the asafoetida plants get really big, ferula is the genus, Ferula. They cut it to the ground, and then the stump of the flower stalk starts to ooze a sap, which solidifies into a gum, and that's what is collected and used in cooking. It has this really funky taste. And my impression is that, asafoetida, I don't know what the asa part is referring to, but foetida means smelling bad, or, fetid, the English word fetid. And I think in Indian cooking, it's asafoetida is largely used by the Jains, who are vegetarians, but sort of many steps beyond your typical vegetarian, because they don't even eat certain plants. Like they won't eat bulbs like onions and garlic, and I think they don't eat fruit until it falls from the tree. They won't pick a fruit from a tree. And asafoetida, not so much when you taste it by itself, but when it's added to a dish, sort of imparts that oniony garlic flavor. I use it. I do a lot of Indian cooking. I want to point out one little plant that, I suspect when lots of people see a fern growing in this very sunny, dry spot, they think, well, we're a bunch of idiots around here and don't know any better. Why did we plant a fern in the sun? And we do associate ferns with shade, but there are ferns that definitely grow in sun. And this is one of the little rock ferns. It used to be in the genus Chilanthes, but they now have put it in a new genus that it's from somewhere. So it's from Yavapen. I don't know anything more about that geographic location than that. But we have native hairy lip ferns that occur in this area. If you're out in the woods, certainly like on boulders along a stream where it's sunny and there's not too much overhead shade, they'll grow on the leaf litter on a boulder. Chilanthes, or probably now Myriopteris lanosa, is a local little fern that is a rock fern or growing in sun. They seed about, and they'll come up in slightly shadier spots than this, but they certainly tolerate this. But it's not the only genus of sun ferns. There was another one in this bed, but I think it has died out, different genus.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's freezing up. Hopefully they can get that going again.
Mark, in the meantime, can you mention the Latin name of the rock fern? Because somebody might have missed that when it came out.
Sure. Yeah, the the rock fern used to be Chilanthes, and I put it in the chat a little bit up there, and now it's Myriopterus.
Okay.
You probably find it under Chilanthes more than Myriopterus right now if you look for it for sale. All right, looks like we have Doug back.
Okay. Were there any additional questions? I might add that Myriopterus is not the only genus of sun ferns, and one place where you might see quite a few different sun ferns on display is Plantolight's nursery. A lot of species from Mexico and the Southwest U.S. that actually grow in similar habitats to the desert cactus and such. They're probably not reacting because I'm not dappered today.
Behind Chris is a salvia. The genus salvia is in the mint family, the Lamiaceae. And the mint family is huge. It includes not just mentha, the true mints, but so many other plants, salvia, lavender, a lot of culinary herbs like rosemary, sage, thyme, oregano. And the genus salvia is a good example where within that genus you have plants that grow in swamps and plants that are desert plants. So, you might know the growing conditions of one species in that genus, but you still need to find out what the growing requirements are of another species, because they don't all want the same. And this is the little blue cedar sage, Salvia chimidrioides. It's easy enough, but really seems to prefer a well-drained and site on the drier side. It does not tolerate wet, but given those growing conditions, it'll bloom all summer. It's already been in bloom for 2 months or so, and it'll bloom up until frost. It's sort of a little subshrub. It never dies completely to the ground, but retains stems over the winter. And in late winter, we cut it back by a half or so just to clean up the old flower stalks, which common name is autumn sage. Here they tend to bloom continuously from probably April up until frost. I suspect in a climate like Southwest U.S. and Mexico where they're native, and the summer's much hotter and drier than here, that they probably are somewhat dormant in the summer. I'm sure they're still leafed out, but probably just barely getting by. And then in the fall, when the weather cools off and there's a bit more rain, they probably burst out into a heavy bloom. This was had a lot more bloom a few weeks ago, but we're dry again, so it's responding to that. But once we get a rain, it'll be back in full bloom and does tend to bloom fairly continuously all summer long. Many selections. In a few minutes, we'll see an orange flowered selection. Pretty indestructible if you have a good sunny, well-drained spot. They don't need excessive drainage, just, they avoid soggy soil. They'll tolerate average soils. Any questions on any of that? They're fairly well known and really are worthwhile plants. And I'm sorry, the hummingbirds love the salvias. Interesting. Oh, something else right there. This is...
We're freezing up again, Blake. Why don't you, we got the name of that Bulbini abyssinica, but we're not getting much else. Why don't we stop there and get some, we have a question
about... For a few years, the foliage thought the...
Doug, we had a question about the Salvia gregii. Somebody asked, does it need to be cut back?
I didn't hear that whole question. Question about cutback, but not the midsection of that sentence.
Salvia gregii, does that need to be cut back?
The plant doesn't need us to cut it back, but in order to improve its appearance, we cut it back by about a third to a half every year in late winter or very early spring, because they retain the old flower stalks. And it's just like a budley. It's going to do just fine if you don't clean it up, but it's going to look very much better if you cut it back just to clean it up. It doesn't require any precision. It's, just cut it back so the top third of the plant is no longer there and the new growth will grow out and you won't be looking at last year's spent flower stalks.
We have another salvia question that's a little bit not one you talked about, but somebody asked if you have success with salvia lophantha. They had a beautiful one last year, but it didn't return even though they mulched it well in zone 8A.
Oh, and all right. Salvia lophantha is absolutely spectacular in, about September, October. It's so spectacular. I think it's worth planting each spring to have that glorious display in the autumn, but it is not reliably winter hardy here. And I might think that if you mulch it with something that retains a lot of moisture, like rotted leaves or something, you might even decrease its overwintering, because it's a desert plant. It's native to the Southwest U.S. and I guess into Mexico. I'd be thrilled if it was reliably winter hardy, but I don't count on it returning. We've had a newer selection called Greenwood that has come back the last couple winters in a well-drained, largely unmulched location. But the other more common cultivars have not been reliably winter hardy for us.
Okay. We also, you were frozen up. We got a good view of the bulbini, but we didn't hear anything you said. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Mark, does it grow from an actual bulb? I'm sure the generic name bulbine or bulbini is not referring to a bulb, but I don't know whether it's growing from a bulb or more just like a root system like a Nymphophia, but it blooms most of the summer and it's been winter hardy here, well, for many, many years. I don't know how long, but this would be my fifth summer in this job. It certainly has gone through all the previous winters without any compromise, without being compromised by a cold winter at all. And I don't know if you heard the part where I mentioned we have another species of bulbini narcissifolium. It's in front of the lath house and it has yellow flowers, but it's gone through 2 winters now, again, fully winter hardy the last couple of winters.
We met the Hesperaloe earlier, our first plant. And I mentioned it was a woody lily, and of course the other plant that has been described as the woody lily are the agaves. The genus agave is quite large. I don't know how many, I suspect 100 or several hundred species. And they range from the upper Midwest of the US, so from very cold climates, but all the way through the arid tropics. And I do need to mention that I know I used to think that tropics meant a wet climate, but the term tropics just means frost-free. It could be wet or dry. So a lot of deserts are tropical in that they're dry and but frost-free. So agaves range from very cold hardy species to ones that are tropical and would only succeed here as a summer plant or a plant taken inside in the winter. And, some agave plants get huge, 5-6 feet tall, but others are small. This is a wonderful smaller species, Agave lophantha, and a very beautiful variegated form, quadricolor, 4-colored. And maybe the majority of agaves are spreading plants, and you see this little offset is quite a distance from the parent plant. good 6 inches. More typically, they make a solid mass spreading outward. But others, other agaves, and we'll see some examples, don't make any offsets. So when they bloom, the whole plant dies. Whereas these ones that make colonies, if this plant bloomed, this rosette would die, but the plants around it that did not bloom would continue on. Gee, I wonder if this one way over here is an offset as well. It's traveling fast. But they're all, almost all the agaves are viciously spined, and, I admire them, but if I have to weed around them, I weed very slowly. I think this is, here we go, Thymus masticina. No, Thymus zygis. I did not know that name. Brush the foliage. It has sort of this menthol-like fragrance, sort of like eucalyptus. But and this is almost done blooming. You see, they have this flower head, but the actual flowers are these small whitish flowers. But Thymes and many other members of the mint family are really good plants for pollinators. We have a big bumblebee there visiting the flowers. Probably a week ago, when it still had lots of flowers, there'd be a lot of pollinators on it. This cactus is going to have a flower later on today. Some of them open at certain times of the day. Maybe some general comments on the rooftop. This is full sun all day. The soil mix varies from bed to bed, but it's extremely well-drained soil mix. A good part of it is this gravel. This is permatil, which is shale that has been puffed at high temperatures, sort of like Rice Krispies. So it's lighter weight than your standard gravel. And we are now on top of the roof. If we jump up and down, Mark could probably hear us down in his office. And a real useful concept for us all to keep in mind is don't fight the site. This is sunny and it's very dry. We could plant water lilies up here if we came up and watered them once an hour. Or we could grow, daylilies and Japanese iris up here if we watered it once a day. But, gets pretty ridiculous. Just, the amount of water and the time spent watering, though I guess it could be automated. I started in this job in 2017. 2018 was quite wet for a good part of the year. And then in late summer, it stopped raining and suddenly realized how dry this spot was. And so since then, we've just been planting very drought tolerant plants up here. And, a lot of cactus, a lot of Mediterranean members of the mint family. This is another oregano that's not yet in bloom, but this is one that's quite, that you could certainly use in the kitchen. But later on, it's fairly showy in bloom. It's one named Lizzie. And, rosemary and lavender. A lot of desert natives like the agaves and the cactus we've met earlier. Because we're working with drought-tolerant plants up here, we rarely water up here unless we've gone many weeks without rain. We did a lot of planting recently, and so we do some hand watering of newly planted things, including the cactus. This one with the flag, that's newly planted, but a lot of these guys are newly planted. But they seem happy. And did I plant this agave here a few weeks ago? To keep people from trying to remove this concrete ball out of the ground. And there's this adorable little dwarf prickly pear here, the little one that Plant Delight's named Potato, that never amounts to anything either because people stand on it or they take little pieces of it home. So maybe in time, it'll amount to something. Makes a pretty little carpet of chubby little stems. This is an interesting cactus. This is the Echinocereus viridiflorus, meaning green flowered. And you see echinos a lot in cactus name, or like in the purple coneflowers or echinacea. It's referring to not groundhogs, hedgehogs, which are, spiny. And that's what echinos is referring to, is spiny. But this is actually, Tim got this from a garden near, actually it was a piece of land where the owner let him collect it from, and it was near Denver, Colorado. So this is an extremely cold hardy cactus. And it has small, translucent green flowers that are quite lovely. It bloomed about a month ago. Those might be fruit. But I don't know how many different cactus we have up here. The notocactus is a South American genus, and many of them are really good. These were good size, maybe 1.5 inch yellow flowers. They do retain these spent flowers, which I guess are becoming fruit. And another species of notocactus we have up here, submamulosa. This little seedling's coming up, which is fun. Oleander, I figured we could try oleander up here because down on the coast you see it growing in, the median of the highway in pure sand. This is their second summer and they haven't thrived, but they're surviving. So maybe in time, when they get a big root system, they'll bloom.
I'm hoping that in time those oleanders do well, because I've seen several oleanders in gardens near the Arboretum that are in full bloom right now. So it'd be nice to have a large shrub up on the roof in full bloom.
Somebody wanted to know how deep our soil mix is on the roof.
Mark, you probably know better than I do how deep those soils are.
They range from about 4 inches to some places as much as 12 inches where it slopes up. It's not terribly deep anywhere. Where that oleander was probably not very big. Deep.
Mark, a question for you. Am I correct in thinking that the purpose of the planted roof isn't just about moderating temperatures in the building, but also capturing a lot of rainfall? So it doesn't just run off the rooftop and go in the storm drain and on its way to the Atlantic Ocean, but is rather captured in the growing beds on the rooftop.
Yeah, they're set up to drain quickly because you don't want too much water sitting up on a roof, but it slows it down and that gets it cooler, which is an issue with storm runoff, especially here where it's so hot when we have thunderstorms, and takes out some of the minerals and the nutrients and the contaminants in the soil as it goes through. Somebody asked about Gaillardia. Will it do well here?
Gaillardia?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we probably pointed it out. When we redo these tours, we don't show every last excruciating minute of the actual tour, but on the rooftop is a selection of Gaillardia aestivalis, which is the fire wheel. The Gaillardia aestivalis is not the common Indian blanket flower with the red flowers tipped with yellow. And the common Gaillardia is a short-lived perennial or maybe even an annual, but Gaillardia aestivalis is a long-lived perennial, something JC first introduced to the Arboretum. You know how some summers in this area can be devastatingly dry for months on time, but even during summers like that at the Arboretum, Gaillardia aestivalis continues to bloom. There's two subspecies. Gaillardia aestivalis is typically yellow, but then Estivalis winkleri can either be white or purple or pink. And that subspecies of Gaillardia estivalis is very rare in the wild, but it's an extremely easy garden plant and very, very drought tolerant. And, they're real showy in bloom.
There was a question about the plant behind the concrete ball with more height. And I didn't notice that when I went through. I think that was probably the Hyalus, I think now Argentea, used to be Plasia Argentea.
The grass-like plant with the silver foliage.
Yeah.
Yeah, we enjoyed that because this foliage is pleasantly sort of sparkly silver.
Yeah, and it
does spread some.
Yeah, it can spread quickly. It's from Argentina and Bolivia, I believe, and is actually an aster, despite looking like a grass.
Yeah, it was in bloom a little while ago with sort of lavender pink flowers that remind me a little bit of chicory flowers.
Any other questions from our folks at home or here?
I came late because, of all things, my landscaper arrived just at 3:00. But Mexican firegrass, I'm in zone 7 here in the U.S. and trying to raise some Mexican firegrass, and it's been a struggle. I just wonder if there's any tricks to doing that.
I don't know Mexican fire.
What was it? Mexican firegrass? I don't know Mexican firegrass. Mexican feathergrass? Was that?
It's a grass roughly about a foot high, very thin, very wavy. I bought it because of its motion coming. It would, in my lawn, it would work out great with westerly breezes. And I've struggled to get a lot of growth. 1 or 2 will grow well and the rest won't. And I just wondered if there's tricks to raising it.
I think you're talking about Mexican hairgrass or feathergrass, which used to be tenuissima and now is in the genus Nazella. I think Nazella tenuissima, meaning very, very slender, like a tenuous argument. I've grown it for decades and themselves with a generous number of seedlings. It's a grass that is sort of as beautiful as it is in bloom. It's sort of as equally ugly when it's gone by, especially in a wet season, because all that hair gets matted down instead of this ethereal, wispy hair that moves with the slightest breeze. It becomes, matted down in these great big clots. And if you cut an old plant back, it usually grumbles and often doesn't, respond well to being cut back. So don't expect the plant to live long. Allow it to go to seed. If you have like gravel paths or your bed is mulched in gravel, it'll reseed quite well in there. It's certainly worth growing, but don't expect it to be the carefree and lovely display that you might see in an arid land garden.
I want to make a comment. Somebody put in the note that it's invasive in the Raleigh area and spreads like fire all around. It's really not. It can be a real problem in some areas of the country. Here it will, as Doug mentioned, it'll seed around pretty nicely in a garden, but it is not an escapee that has caused problems as an invasive plant. And there's a difference between something that spreads in the garden and something that's invasive.
Yeah, I've never seen it outside a garden. And you would think if it was going you'd probably see it because the seed probably blows away on the wind.
Yeah. Any other question? Oh, there was a question about, this isn't really what you're talking about, but Somebody says they can't seem to grow reblooming azaleas here. They die. Why?
They can't grow what?
Reblooming azaleas. Yes.
Okay, a little off topic, but I'm happy to answer the question. If you're talking about the encore azaleas, the more sun they get, the better. We've grown up with azaleas, always thinking them as shade plants, but the encore azaleas were bred in Mobile, Alabama, and some of their complex hybrids, and some of their parents, like rhododendron oldhamii from Taiwan, and the azaleas, even in the encore azaleas, are not blooming well. I would say give them more sun. Nothing sadder than a camellia or an azalea that's in too heavy shade and is scrawny and doesn't bloom well. I have far less experience with other series of reblooming azaleas. NC State's plant breeder Tom Rainey, Dr. Tom Rainey, has bred a series of reblooming azaleas series. And we've had one in the garden, and when we grow it in a fair amount of sun, it's quite good at reblooming. I might also add, in my experience with the encore azaleas, some are super good for this area. The best will start blooming in late summer or even earlier, like August, midsummer, and continue blooming up until a hard frost. I've grown a few other encore azaleas that manage to start blooming about the day before you have frost, and that's the last flowers you'll see. So some varieties are actually superb for this area, others not so much. And I've grown 20 some different cultivars. I think there's now in excess of 30 different cultivars, so I haven't tried the newer ones.
We have a number of butterfly bushes. The genus Dahlia is actually fairly large. The common one is, very well known, but the other species are not known much at all. This is Dahlia wardii, and I meant to look up to see where it's native, and I don't know. Does anyone know anything about Dahlia wardii? But it's not showy in bloom, and I think it's already done blooming, but interesting foliage plant. Leucophyllum. Leuco is referring to white, like white blood cells or leukocytes. But this is typically a silver foliage plant, Leucophyllum frutescens, but this is a fairly green foliage selection called green cloud. But it's in the figwort family, the Scrophulariaceae, family characterized by tubular flowers like that, and it blooms for an extended period of time. It's native to Texas and Mexico, and one of its common names is Texas sage, maybe only because the foliage looks a bit like sage. I don't know that it has much fragrance. Interesting little morning glory, Convolvulus Mauritanus. It's managed to sort of weave its way up into that yucca, but it's primarily a ground covering little plant. It dies away in the winter and returns each spring. This clematis here is not in bloom, but some xeric plants they're from humid climates, but they're have evolved adaptations to dry climates, because where they occur in the wild are places with adequate rainfall, but the soil's excessively well drained, and that clematis is native to shale barrens where the soil is very rocky, or some xeric plants are native to like rocky outcroppings in otherwise humid climate. But whereas the neighboring situation is where more vigorous neighbors is in these very extremely well-drained locations. You develop adaptations to drought tolerance there. Oh, I feel like I'm just blathering and not making much sense now. I wish there were more questions. This is the fried egg plant. And last week it had lots of flowers. Now it's done blooming and it looks like it's developing some sort of insect problem. It's a California native. The genus is Romnea coulteri, commemorating two people's family name, Romney and Coulter. But the flowers are about that big when it's in good condition. And I think we often see a little bit more sporadic bloom later on, but its main bloom is now past. And it's a big herbaceous perennial. I think we cut it to the ground each winter, but I'm not sure. It's poppy family, Papaveraceae.
Doug, there was a you cut out a little bit at the last bit when you were talking about the Clematis fremontii.
Yes, I was saying that some plants have adapted to xeric conditions because though they occur in a humid location, they grow on soils that are excessively well drained. And that little clematis is an example of a plant that occurs in shale barrens where the soil is extremely rocky. And so there's very little water retained in that soil. But it has become adapted to those extremely dry growing conditions.
Other questions for Doug? I will mention, I put it in the chat but for you, Doug, that Buddleia X wardii is from the Sangpo gorges in Asia by Kingdom Ward, discovered by Kingdom Ward, but there is some question about whether what's in cultivation is actually that plant or not, because it was never brought into cultivation back when it was first described, and so there's some questions about it, but there you go. Alternifolia and maybe Crispa, I can't remember, hybrid. Any other questions from people about xeric gardening, or last questions for Doug before we finish up? It is 4:00 now, and if not, make sure you save your questions up, the real stumpers, for next week, and we can pick Doug's brain. Got a comment that says, "Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it."
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the information and also the help with the Mexican firegrass or Mexican grass. That's my name for it, unfortunately.
All right. Well, we will see you next week for our horticulture hour. Hope you'll join us. Check out our calendar of events. There's a lot there, adult and youth programs. And we hope we'll see you for lots of them, but especially for next week, to say thank you and goodbye to Doug and Chris.
Okay, thank you.
You guys go.
Bye now.